All right, good morning and welcome back to the great and spacious building. I'm Dr. Denton, and I'm glad to be back. I spent a weekend last week at a music festival, Ohana, out on Doheny Beach. It was beautiful. It's great, a whole bunch of great bands, but I'm glad to be back with you guys. So, today, our focus, like I said in our last video, we're going to take a look at a specific individual, that being Jane Manning James. So, Jane Manning James, who is she? So, she is an African American woman. She was born free in Connecticut in 1821, by all accounts. And Jane Manning James was sort of the perfect convert for what was going to be Mormonism shortly after her birth. She was always, according to her journal, searching for something more, searching for more answers than the typical Protestant churches of the 19th century had to offer. So Mormonism is going to offer her that more that she's looking for. And that conversion is going to come in 1842, so 12 years after the church is organized. We're going to see Jane Manning James become an official member in 1842. She had heard missionaries talk to her, and immediately she felt the spirit, felt conviction that what she was hearing was the truth. And upon her baptism, one of the gifts she received is going to be the gift of tongues, something that Brigham Young was actually really familiar with. Brigham Young had spoken in tongues during the early church period upon his baptism, something that sort of shocked Joseph Smith, but albeit it was seen as the power that resided within Brigham Young. So interestingly enough, we have that gift of tongues here being held by Jane Manning James as well. 1843, her faith is extremely evident with what happens in 1843. As the main church body is moving to Nauvoo, Illinois, Jane Manning James is going to have to make that trip from Connecticut out to Nauvoo, Illinois. And for the most part, she's going to travel along with a group. However, she's going to hit a point in Buffalo, New York, where black travelers are going to be refused passage to Ohio. And they're going to be refused passage because, well, they're black. And it's the 19th century. So Jane Manning James, she could have given up here. She could have set down roots in Buffalo. She could have headed back and made the walk back to Connecticut. However, she's going to trek ahead. So while the others are going to take a water route or a caravan route to Ohio, Jane Manning James is going to be forced, if she wants to make it to Illinois, she's going to have to get there on her own. So she sends her luggage ahead. She leaves her luggage with the group that she was traveling with in hopes that it's going to make it to Illinois, and eventually she'll be there as well. However, her and her family end up having to walk the remaining 800 plus miles on foot. From her journals, the accounts say that their feet became so sore and cracked that they bled. She also notes that her shoes essentially disintegrated from all of the walking that they had done. But upon getting there, they were united in prayer. And one of the miracles for Jane Manning James is that their feet are going to be healed upon arriving in Nauvoo. So really cueing in on those spiritual powers that she had been looking for earlier in her life, and Mormonism is seemingly offering these things for her. Upon arriving at Nauvoo, she's going to make an immediate impact, and she's going to be hired at the Mansion House, which, if you don't know, that's the home of Joseph and Emma Smith. And her role, she's going to be a domestic servant and a laundress. So the goal is going to be, essentially, she's going to be the housekeeper for the Mansion House. And with this, she's going to have a lot of one-on-one interaction with both Joseph and Emma, the first lady of Mormonism. So she has a really sacred experience early on. As the laundress, she's responsible for doing the laundry of both Joseph and Emma. And her sacred experience is, while she's washing Joseph Smith's clothes, she ends up seeing the temple robes. She hasn't been through the temple. She's not aware of the ceremony. And all of a sudden, she sees these robes, and for her and her accounts, the Spirit speaks to her and makes their sacred meaning manifest to her. So without ever having experienced the temple, without ever having learned about the temple, she's manifested with the holiness and the sacred meaning of these garments just upon seeing them for the first time. Her second sacred experience in Nauvoo, as she notes, comes alongside with Joseph Smith's mother, Lucy Mack Smith. And Lucy Mack Smith, being that Jane Manning James was always in the home and Lucy Mack was in and out due to Emma and Joseph living at the mansion house, Lucy was another individual that Jane Manning James came into contact with, and Lucy allowed Jane to handle an extremely sacred object. And she tells her, "You are not permitted to see it, but you have been permitted to handle the Urim and Thummim." Likely what we're talking about here is going to be a seer stone, so Jane Manning James is going to be given the opportunity under cloth to handle a seeing stone here. So a giant key takeaway for this from Jane Manning James, Jane was a witness to some of the most intimate secrets of the faith's founder. She had seen the temple robes when others hadn't, and apparently had a spiritual experience where the importance of those robes had been manifest to her. And she had also been able to handle a seer stone given to her from Lucy Mack Smith. So Jane Manning James is in on things that other individuals haven't had the opportunity to even know actually exist at this point. However, upon Joseph Smith's death and upon Mormonism's exodus to the Utah territory, we're going to see things change for James. One of the big shifts is going to be in 1852. We're going to have the racial priesthood ban. So Jane Manning James is going to come up against a wall of race. And it's about 1847 that she arrives in the Salt Lake Valley. And when she arrives, she marries Isaac James, which is where we get the last name James. And she continues her very charismatic faith. She continues to speak in tongues, and she participates in healings in a relief society. She's extremely active in the charismatic portions of Mormonism from the early church. But as the church formalizes, racial barriers are going to harden. We've talked about the birth of the racial priesthood ban and the official announcement of it in February of 1852. Jane Manning James, being a black woman, is going to be subject to that ban. And part of that is as she's seeking to get her temple endowment, now that she's married to Isaac James, she's barred from entering the temple, and she's barred from receiving the temple endowment, which would include the sealing and eternal ordinances that are needed to make it into the celestial kingdom. And Jane Manning James, she's not just going to accept this at face value and say, well, because I'm black and because Brigham Young announced this, I'm just never going to be able to get in. No, she's had a close and intimate relationship with the church's founder, so she believes that the church's leaders are good, reasonable individuals that will understand her past in the church. And therefore, she writes up some petitions. She petitioned leaders multiple times, asking to first be sealed to the Smith family. But more specifically, she's seeking to make it into the temple. She's petitioning to have her temple endowments, her temple ordinances done by her in the temple. And the first refusal comes from Brigham Young. He denies the initial sealing to the Smith family, but she's going to continue her petitioning. And in December 27th of 1884, she petitions then president of the church, John Taylor, and she requests to be adopted to Joseph Smith and his family. She wants to be a family member via the process of adoption that had been proliferated during Brigham Young's time as president of the church. That's petition number 1 that we have here after Brigham Young denied the initial. Following that up, February 7th, 1890, she's going to shift her aim a little bit. She writes to Joseph F. Smith and requests to be sealed to Q. Walker Lewis. Q. Walker Lewis, we talked about him in an earlier episode, focusing on Joseph Smith and those that had received the priesthood under Joseph Smith. Q. Walker Lewis was a barber in Massachusetts, and he had received the priesthood from William Smith, the brother of Joseph Smith. Leaders knew he had the priesthood. Brigham Young went as far as to say that he was a stand-up individual and knew that he had the priesthood. And James stated that Lewis had wanted to be sealed to her before he had passed away. At this point, he had been dead 25 to 35 years, and James is seeking to be sealed to him. So the response, what are we getting? It's sort of radio silence for Jane Manning James. However, we get what's going on from journals in the background. Specifically, a couple of sources. One are the Wilford Woodruff journals, and the others are actually going to be Quorum of the 12 Apostle Minutes. And from Wilford Woodruff's journals, undated account, so we end up getting that he denies Jane's request. He actually calls her Black Jane and says that he can't give her access to the temple. This is actually corroborated by the Quorum of the 12 meeting minutes from August 22nd, 1885. The quorum, when talking about Jane Manning James, so this is important to know, this individual who is requesting to make it into the temple and receive her ordinances, her case is being talked about by the 15 highest leaders in the church president, the first presidency, and the Quorum of the 12. So this individual is in the room where decisions happen. Figuratively speaking, her situation is in that room. The Quorum of the 12 in their minutes states that they could see no way by which they could accede to her wishes, essentially saying that the doctrine is what it is. Blacks cannot receive their temple ordinances. Men can't receive the priesthood. Women can't go into the temple because the curse of Cain is the curse of Cain. They cannot receive their temple ordinances. So there's no way that they can get around that in order to create a special situation for Jane Manning James. However, by 1902, so 7 years after that last minute, the minutes from the Quorum of the 12, by 1902, obviously we have Jane Manning James not giving up, continuing to petition along the way. Otherwise, this conversation would have died. But by 1902, the Quorum of the 12, they are still having discussions. She had continued to petition for the temple work, and eventually it paid off in some way that there's going to be some concession from the Quorum of the 12. The minutes from January 2nd, 1902 offer a solution of sorts. They agree to allow Jane to be sealed to Joseph Smith and his family as a servant. So the option offered by the Quorum of the 12 is to allow Jane Manning James via a proxy to receive temple work that wouldn't give her access necessarily to the highest levels of the celestial kingdom. She wouldn't be sealed to her husband, but she would be sealed to the Smith family. And this position wouldn't be as one of Joseph Smith's plural wives because miscegenation, and apparently that matters in the afterlife as well. Instead, she would be a servant, meaning throughout the eternity, she would essentially be the slave, the laundress, the housekeeper for the Smith family in the eternities, taking care of the ever-growing family that Joseph Smith had via all of his polygamous relationships. Jane Manning James would be there to just clean up all of that. So I don't know how that sounds to you, but being a housekeeper for the eternities doesn't really ring my happiness vibes. And that must have been the same for Jane Manning James as well, because she was not appeased. She denied that offer. And we can see this because a year later, August 31st, 1903, she writes a follow-up letter to Wilford Woodruff and continues to ask now, not just for adoption to the Smith family or sealing to Q Walker Lewis. Instead, it's, hey, can I get my personal endowments? And unfortunately for her, she would die a few short years later in 1908 without her temple work done. She is an example, though, of an individual who faced repeated racism and targeting via the 1852 priesthood ban. Somehow, despite that, probably because of the experiences that she had with Joseph Smith and his family, the sacred experiences, the manifestation of the gift of tongues, she never left the church despite the rejection. And for the most part, she lives on as a respected and active member. People speak highly of Jane Manning James. In fact, the Quorum of the 12 received letters from other members on behalf of Jane saying, hey, she was promised these things. She's this awesome woman. It would be awesome if she could receive these temple ordinances. So Jane Manning James is a highly respected member amongst the community of Mormons of which she lives. The important thing here, so she has an unshakable faith. She defies early institutional racism by pushing for her own rights, and she's just a key figure in the study of the racial priesthood ban because of her efforts to petition church leaders. We have accounts from church leaders that would probably remain hidden in the silence, but because she was pushing their hand, they had to respond, and we had to get why they believe this, why they couldn't allow this, why they allowed this but not that. So it really forces the hand and forces us to hear from the church leaders themselves. And without Jane Manning James pushing for her own rights and her own eternal salvation, we would be lacking that source material. She ensured that her story was recorded and therefore helped historians like myself. So the story of Jane Manning James is one of faith, it's one of resilience, it's one of racism, but it's also one of building a historical record for individuals like myself and others like me who really want to delve into the who, the what, the where, the why, the how of the Mormon priesthood ban. So I owe this video to Jane Manning James and her efforts. And hopefully you've enjoyed this. If you have, please like, subscribe, share this video, leave a comment below if you feel like you have something to say, and I'll join you in the comment section when I see those. And make sure you check our next video out. I've got something planned in the next couple of weeks, maybe a little book study that I'll introduce in my next video. But again, like, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment below, and have a great day.